On August 1st, 1941, the tarmac at Bethpage on Long Island, New York, vibrated with anticipation. Chief Engineer Robert Hall gripped the control stick as the prototype began its journey down the runway. The machine beneath him looked almost impossibly heavy for a single engine to manage. Its barrel-shaped body seemed to defy the very laws of physics that governed flight. As the aircraft climbed skyward, observers in Navy dress uniforms along the runway shook their heads in unison. They were watching the largest single-engine aircraft any of them had ever seen take to the air. The XTBF-1 rotated upward with a grinding determination that spoke more of mechanical will than aerodynamic grace. Too complicated, too heavy, too ambitious. That was the verdict whispered among the skeptics. None of them could have foreseen that this awkward machine, written off by critics as an engineering failure waiting to materialize, would eventually destroy more enemy warships than any other American aircraft in the entire war. The mathematics of naval combat were about to transform, not through sleek design or elegant engineering, but through raw, overwhelming effectiveness packaged inside an overcomplicated frame that somehow performed better than anything sharing the skies with it. The story of how this aircraft came to exist began 2.5 years earlier, in March 1939, when Navy brass issued a requirement that would push every aircraft manufacturer in America to their limits. The Douglas TBD Devastator, already flying since 1937, had become obsolete. The Navy hungered for a replacement, and they wanted it yesterday. The specifications they demanded seemed almost impossible to achieve. 300 miles per hour as a minimum speed, a 1,000-mile range, a 3-person crew. Ammunition and weapons packed inside the fuselage in a bomb bay, protective armor surrounding the flight crew, fuel tanks that could seal themselves to prevent fires, and most ambitiously, a motorized turret mounted on top of the fuselage, a feature that had stumped every aircraft company that tried it before. 13 companies threw their hats into the ring. The field quickly narrowed to just 2 serious contenders. Vought Aviation designed something sleek and elegant that caught the Navy's eye immediately. Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation countered with something that looked like someone had taken the F-4F Wildcat fighter and blown it up to grotesque proportions. The Vought design attracted admirers. The Grumman design looked complicated and strange. Vought received the initial contract, but then reality struck. Vaught's assembly lines were already drowning under orders for the F-4U Corsair fighter. There was simply no way they could build torpedo bombers on the schedule the Navy demanded. So the contract shifted to Grumman, and suddenly Leroy Grumman's engineers faced the terrifying reality of an impossible deadline to construct an impossible aircraft. Robert Hall sat at his desk staring at mountains of blueprints and requirements. Every single thing the Navy wanted added more weight, more systems, more complexity, systems that had never been tried together on a carrier aircraft before. The internal bomb bay alone kept him awake at night. It had to be cavernous enough to accommodate either a Mark 13 torpedo that weighed 2,000 pounds and measured over 22 feet, or 400-pound bombs, or depth charges, or mines. The bay doors had to work perfectly in salt spray under extreme gravity forces during maneuvers and when the aircraft took battle damage. The powered turret created an entirely different nightmare. Everyone who had tried building rear turrets before had failed because hydraulic systems and hand-cranked systems were just too slow, too prone to breaking, too easily damaged by enemy fire. Grumman made a bold gamble. They chose an electrically powered turret, betting everything on a technology that had never been tested in actual combat. If the electrical system failed, the gunner sitting in that turret would be a sitting duck with no way to defend himself. The wing folding mechanism piled on yet another layer of complexity. To squeeze onto carrier elevators and fit inside hangar decks, the wings needed to collapse inward. But these weren't small wings. They stretched 54 feet from tip to tip when fully extended. Leroy Grumman himself cracked this puzzle during a design session, using a pink eraser to represent the fuselage and bending paper clips into wings. He discovered what would become known as the stow wing, a folding design that bent back and upward at the same time, compressing the wingspan down to just 18 feet when retracted. Making this mechanism work required hydraulic systems, locking mechanisms, and reinforcements throughout the wing structure that added hundreds of pounds of dead weight. The engine they selected, a Wright R2600 producing 1,700 horsepower, represented the most powerful single engine available anywhere. Even this technological monster struggled under the load. The empty weight sat at just over 10,000 pounds. When fully loaded for combat, the aircraft weighed nearly 16,000 pounds, making it the heaviest single-engine aircraft anywhere in the world. Navy officers called it the pregnant beast. Other pilots whispered about the turkey. These were not terms of endearment. On December 30, 1940, the Navy committed to ordering 286 of these aircraft, over 7 months before anyone even knew if the prototype would successfully fly. The desperation was unmistakable. War approached like a storm on the horizon, and the Navy needed torpedo bombers immediately, complications and all. When the prototype finally flew on August 1, 1941, it revealed the good and the bad simultaneously. The aircraft climbed into the sky, but it flew like a truck on wheels, heavy and ponderous. It moved nothing like the nimble fighters pilots had grown accustomed to. The controls felt mushy and imprecise. The visibility from the pilot's position proved disappointing despite the raised cockpit location. Flying this machine demanded endless attention, constant corrections, and brute strength on the controls. Yet it remained stable even under stress, and it could indeed carry its complete combat load. Most importantly, all those intricate systems that experts had declared would certainly fail actually functioned correctly. Then came November 28, 1941. Flames suddenly erupted through the fuselage during a test flight near Brentwood, consuming the aircraft. Test pilots Bob Hall and Gordon Israel both ejected safely as the prototype became an inferno descending toward the ground. It crashed and burned completely. The critics circled like sharks smelling blood. The design contained too many moving parts, they declared. Too many systems meant too many places where disaster could strike. The electrical turret, the folding wings, the massive bomb bay. This was all beyond what any aircraft could handle. The entire program should be scrapped. Grumman refused to back down. They accelerated their efforts instead. The second prototype was already taking shape. Testing resumed. Engineers attacked problems with determination and creativity. On January 3, 1942, just months after the first crash, the initial production TBF-1 rolled out of the factory. Less than 5 months had passed since the first prototype was destroyed. Less than 4 weeks had passed since Pearl Harbor yanked America into the war. By early June 1942, more than 100 TBF Avengers had left the factory and reached Navy squadrons. Half a dozen of these brand-new aircraft went to Torpedo Squadron 8 for combat evaluation. The old devastators from this same squadron were already aboard the carrier Hornet, steaming toward danger. The 6 Avengers arrived at Pearl Harbor mere hours after the carriers had already left for a battle, shaping up near a small atoll named Midway. The call went out for volunteers. 6 crews stepped forward. Most had never flown beyond sight of land. All 6 machines reached Midway Island safely. On June 4, 1942, as dawn broke over the Pacific, 6 brand-new TBF Avengers thundered down Henderson Field's runway at 07:10 hours. They climbed skyward as part of the first attack wave against the Japanese carrier fleet. These aircraft had been in combat service for exactly 5 months. Their crews possessed almost no battle experience. They were piloting the most complex torpedo bomber ever constructed into the teeth of the most hardened carrier force on Earth. Japanese fighters fell upon them like predators. Mitsubishi A6M Zeros, piloted by veterans who had fought over Pearl Harbor, across China and through the Dutch East Indies, descended on the slow-moving Avengers. The TBF's defensive guns, a single 50 caliber machine gun in the upper turret and a 30 caliber weapon mounted below, proved painfully inadequate against the determined fighter attacks. The Avengers could barely limp along at 130 miles per hour when making a torpedo run. The Zeros simply exceeded 300. One by one, the new aircraft fell from the sky. Ensign Albert Kyle Ernest's TBF absorbed hit after hit. 20mm cannon shells punched through wings, tore through the fuselage, shredded the tail. His turret gunner, aviation machinist's mate, 3rd Class J. Darrell Manning, died instantly when a cannon round struck him in the chest. His radio operator, aviation radio man third class Harry Ferrier, only 17 years old, took shrapnel to the head and wrist. The hydraulic system failed, lines spraying fluid across compartments. The electrical system sparked and smoked dangerously. Ernest's instrument panel shattered into fragments, with blood from his wounded radio man painting the cockpit crimson. Yet somehow the TBF kept flying. That massive radial engine, despite multiple direct hits, continued to produce power and thrust. The self-sealing fuel tanks, one of those complicated systems the critics had insisted would prove useless, prevented catastrophic explosions when rounds punctured the wings. The armor plates surrounding the pilot's seat, that extra weight everyone said would destroy performance, absorbed cannon shells and saved Ernest's life. 5 of the 6 Avengers were destroyed. Only Ernest's shattered airframe made it back to Midway, crashing onto the runway with 1 crew member dead and 2 severely wounded. Both Ernest and young Ferrier survived their injuries. Ferrier would later describe the moment he understood they might actually make it. Surrounded by blood in the cockpit, the aircraft barely responding to inputs, yet still fighting through the sky toward home. Engineers later examined the survivor. It had been struck by at least 9 20mm cannon shells and 64 machine gun rounds from smaller caliber weapons. Nearly every critical system bore scars of battle or had ceased functioning entirely. The Battle of Midway would be remembered as a tremendous American victory. The Japanese lost 4 fleet carriers. American dive bombers captured the headlines and the glory. The torpedo bombers, old Devastators and new Avengers alike, endured horrific losses. But the sacrifice of Torpedo Squadron 8 would become the stuff of naval legend. Of the 15 Devastators launched from the Hornet, not a single one returned. 29 men perished. Only Ensign George Gay survived, floating in the ocean and witnessing the battle unfold above him as he clung to debris. The 6 Avengers from Midway lost 5 aircraft with 9 crew members killed. From the entire squadron, just 3 men walked away from that battle alive. Ensign Ernest received the Navy Cross for his actions at Midway, the first of 3 he would earn during the war. The casualty rate for Avengers at Midway reached 83%. The skeptics renewed their assault, demanding the program be cancelled. The aircraft was too fragile, they insisted, too complicated in every way. The losses proved it was a failed experiment. But intelligence officers who examined the wreckage reached a strikingly different conclusion. Ensign Ernest's TBF had absorbed sufficient damage to destroy 10 conventional aircraft, yet it had brought 2 survivors home. The electrical turret, despite catastrophic damage, had continued to function until its gunner was killed. The bomb bay doors had operated flawlessly under fire. The folding wing mechanism had held despite multiple hits to the wing structure. That enormous engine had continued running for 2 hours after taking multiple direct impacts. This aircraft was not too elaborate. It was simply too tough to die. Every intricate system, every redundancy, every backup existed precisely for moments like this, when an aircraft needed to absorb punishment and keep fighting. Production ramped up dramatically. By August 1942, dozens of Avengers were arriving at fleet squadrons across the Pacific. Torpedo Squadron 8 reformed with replacement pilots and new aircraft. Over the coming months and years, this unit would earn 2 Presidential Unit citations, becoming one of the most highly decorated squadrons in the entire history of naval aviation. Ensign Ernest rejoined his squadron and fought above Guadalcanal, earning his 2nd Navy Cross. The Battle of the Eastern Solomons on August 24, 1942, gave experienced Avenger crews their first real opportunity to demonstrate what the aircraft could accomplish. 28 TBFs from the carriers Saratoga and Enterprise coordinated an assault on the Japanese fleet. 13 Avengers from Saratoga's VT-8 and 15 from Enterprise's VT-3 approached in formation. They sent the light carrier Ryujo to the bottom with multiple torpedo strikes. 7 Avengers were lost, but those who returned carried vital knowledge back. The aircraft could withstand tremendous punishment. The electrical turret could track and engage multiple fighters at once. The internal bomb bay enabled rapid ordnance switching. The extended range allowed strikes far beyond what old torpedo bombers could achieve. In November 1942, the naval battle of Guadalcanal erupted. Marine and Navy Avengers proved crucial in putting the Japanese battleship Hiei, a massive 37,000-ton warship crippled in nighttime gunnery, at the bottom of the ocean. The Avengers delivered torpedoes into the drifting giant, conclusively proving the complex aircraft could sink major capital ships. Yet the most extraordinary transformation was unfolding thousands of miles away in the Atlantic Ocean, far from Pacific battle headlines. German U-boats were winning the tonnage war, destroying merchant vessels faster than the Allies could construct replacements. The arrival of small escort carriers brought air coverage to convoys, but available aircraft proved inadequate for submarine hunting. The Avenger, with its spacious bomb bay, impressive range, and capacity to carry radar equipment, became the perfect solution for anti-submarine warfare. The TBF-1D variant came equipped with advanced ASB surface search radar that could spot surfaced U-boats even when darkness fell or conditions turned foul. Its massive bomb bay held an impressive array of weaponry: depth charges, conventional bombs, acoustic torpedoes, and most importantly, the closely guarded Mark 24 Fido homing torpedo. As these Avengers launched from escort carriers, they began their relentless pursuit of submarines with remarkable success. Here was an aircraft originally conceived to strike at battleships, now transformed into a submarine hunter. The approach was straightforward, yet brilliant. Radar-equipped Avengers would sweep ahead of merchant convoys, scanning the ocean for any U-boat that surfaced to breathe or charge its batteries. Once the radar operators spotted a contact, the Avenger moved in fast. Depth charges and rockets rained down, forcing the submarine to submerge desperately. The moment a U-boat dove, its speed plummeted from 18 knots down to just 8. The Avenger circled overhead like a hawk, dropping sonobuoys into the water to track the submarine's movements below, while radioing for destroyer escorts to converge on the target. Should the submarine captain attempt a daring surface dash for escape, the waiting Avenger would unleash another load of depth charges. If he chose to stay hidden beneath the waves, destroyers would arrive within minutes to finish the hunt. Between May 1943 and May 1945, Avengers operating from American escort carriers claimed credit for sinking or assisting in the destruction of 35 U-boats throughout the Atlantic. British squadrons, who called their aircraft the Tarpon before adopting the Avenger name, contributed their own impressive tally to the scorecard. When Pacific operations against Japanese submarines were factored in, the total reached approximately 30 additional kills. No other aircraft in the entire war came remotely close to matching this record. The combination of sophisticated radar systems, that cavernous internal bomb bay capable of carrying multiple weapon types, and the remarkable endurance that permitted 8-hour patrol missions, all of it worked together to produce the most lethal submarine killer the world had ever seen. The year 1944 represented the Avengers' moment of peak performance. By then, manufacturers had produced nearly 10,000 of these machines. General Motors' Eastern Aircraft Division had assumed responsibility for most production, assembling 7,546 TBM variants, while Grumman continued building 2,290 TBF models. The shift had been nothing short of remarkable. When Grumman needed to redirect their efforts toward the new F-6F Hellcat fighter, they delivered a demonstration TBF to General Motors constructed entirely with sheet metal screws. Nothing welded, nothing riveted permanently. This Parker Kalin Avenger, nicknamed for the screw manufacturer, became the template. General Motors engineers could take it apart completely, examine every component, and then reconfigure the entire design for high-volume automotive manufacturing. Leroy Grumman himself had doubted whether General Motors could produce even a single airworthy Avenger. Instead, GM ended up building more than 3 times the quantity that Grumman manufactured. The TBM-3 variant emerged in mid-1944, featuring a more robust R2620 engine, generating 1,900 horsepower. That extra power proved essential for compensating against the increasing weight of new radar sets, additional protective armor, and expanded fuel tanks. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 demonstrated everything the Avenger had been designed to accomplish. The engagement that became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot devastated Japanese carrier aviation. American fighters destroyed over 250 Japanese aircraft in a single day alone. Yet the true examination came what happened next. Admiral Mark Mitchell received intelligence that the Japanese carrier fleet was fleeing at maximum range. Over 200 Avengers prepared for a mission that would carry them beyond daylight. Mitchell made a calculated gamble to intercept the retreating enemy. The strike launched as afternoon shadows lengthened, and everyone understood that many aircraft would be returning through complete darkness. Avengers from the carrier Belleau Wood attacked the light carrier Hio, striking with torpedoes amid worsening weather and fading daylight. The ship capsized and sank, taking 247 Japanese sailors to the bottom. Many Avengers burned their last drops of fuel during the return journey, some ditching into the Black Ocean and others crashing onto carrier decks shrouded in darkness. Mitchell ordered every vessel in the fleet to illuminate their positions, abandoning blackout procedures entirely to guide the aircraft to safety. 80 pilots and crew members perished, yet the mission proved that Avengers could operate under conditions that would force other bombers to remain grounded. The extended range, the dependable engines, and the robust construction enabled missions that seemed impossible. October 1944 brought the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval engagement in history, with over 200,000 personnel involved. The Japanese committed virtually everything that remained of their fleet in one final desperate attempt to destroy the American invasion forces at Leyte. Engagement spread across hundreds of nautical miles and unfolded over 3 separate days. Approximately 400 Avengers participated in various phases throughout the battle. The engagement off Samar stands as one of the most extraordinary naval confrontations ever recorded. 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts suddenly confronted 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers. These escort carriers, designated Taffy III, carried Avengers and Wildcats equipped for ground support operations, not fleet-level combat. When Admiral Takeo Kurita's Central Force appeared along the horizon at dawn on October 25th, the American contingent faced overwhelming numerical and firepower disadvantages. Lieutenant Commander Ernest Evans, commanding officer of Gambier Bay's Composite Squadron, directed his Avengers in relentless assaults against the massive Japanese warships. These Avengers carried no armor-piercing ordnance, and many had been loaded without torpedoes, having been prepared for ground support operations instead. They pressed the attack regardless, making repeated runs with whatever weapons they possessed. Certain pilots executed dummy attacks with no weapons whatsoever, attempting to distract Japanese gunners and buying precious seconds for the carriers to escape. The accompanying destroyers charged directly at the Japanese battleships in what seemed like certain death missions. The Avengers coordinated their attacks, striking from multiple angles simultaneously. Gambier Bay absorbed repeated hits and went down, claiming over 100 sailors. Yet the American counterattacks convinced Admiral Kurita that he was facing full-sized fleet carriers with complete air groups, not escort carriers with limited assets. After sinking Gambier Bay and 3 destroyers, Kurita ordered a withdrawal through San Bernardino Strait, abandoning his assault on the invasion forces. The Avengers of Taffy III had repelled the most formidable surface fleet Japan had dispatched since Midway. They accomplished this remarkable feat without proper weapons or specialized training, demonstrating the aircraft's extraordinary adaptability under the most desperate imaginable circumstances. On October 24, 1944, the day before the engagement off Samar, successive waves of American aircraft descended on the massive battleship Musashi as it attempted transit through the Sibuyan Sea. This vessel represented the largest battleship ever constructed, displacing over 72,000 tons and armed with 9 18-inch guns protected by armor plating 16 inches thick. Japanese naval architects had insisted the ship was unsinkable. The assault began at 10:27 in the morning. 259 aircraft launched in 6 separate waves from 4 American carriers, concentrating their entire force on the giant target. Avengers delivered torpedo strikes from all directions. Historians remain uncertain about the precise number, with estimates running from 10 to 19 direct hits. One frequently cited figure suggests 10 hits to the port side and 9 to starboard, although Japanese records indicate 11 total. Each torpedo carried 600 pounds of Torpex explosive, substantially more destructive than ordinary TNT. SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers added 17 bomb impacts to the damage. Just after 1930 hours, the Musashi rolled over and disappeared beneath the surface, taking 1,023 crewmen with her. The largest battleship humanity had ever built fell to air attack, with Avengers delivering decisive torpedo strikes. 5 months later, on April 7, 1945, the Musashi's sister ship Yamato conducted her final operation. Operation 10 Go represented a suicide mission, sending the super battleship on a one-way voyage to Okinawa with fuel sufficient only for the outbound leg. American submarines detected the task force and transmitted its coordinates. Admiral Spruance launched the full force of his air strength, 386 aircraft, of which nearly 150 were Avengers, against the Japanese formation. Combat commenced at 12:37 hours. The initial Avenger wave attacked from the port beam, saturating the Yamato's anti-aircraft defenses. A second wave approached from starboard. By the time a third wave found the ship, the Yamato was listing severely despite remaining afloat. Torpedoes continued finding their mark. American accounts document at least 11 torpedo hits, though exact attribution among different aircraft types remains debated. The Yamato's massive armor scheme, engineered to resist battleship projectiles, proved vulnerable to torpedoes penetrating below the waterline. Compartments rapidly filled with seawater. The list deepened. At 14:23 hours, 2 hours and 46 minutes after the initial attack commenced, the Yamato erupted in a tremendous explosion, a mushroom cloud ascending to heights visible across 60 miles of ocean. Between 2,500 and 3,100 crew perished from a complement of roughly 3,000 men. The battleship age concluded with her sinking. Avengers had eliminated both Yamato-class super battleships. Throughout the war, they had sunk or participated in sinking 12 aircraft carriers, 4 additional battleships, 19 cruisers, 25 destroyers, and approximately 30 submarines. The aggregate tonnage exceeded 1 million tons of enemy shipping destroyed. No other aircraft design approached this achievement. The complex torpedo bomber that detractors had condemned back in 1941 had transformed into history's most formidable anti-shipping weapon. Yet the overwhelming majority of Avenger sorties never involved dramatic torpedo assaults. By late 1944, Japanese surface vessels seldom ventured from protected harbors. The Mark 13 torpedo, despite later improvements, remained inherently problematic, demanding sluggish, unwavering attack profiles that exposed the aircraft to devastating anti-aircraft barrages. Avengers increasingly transitioned toward conventional bombing runs, skip bombing techniques, and rocket attacks. That spacious internal compartment, accommodating a single 2,000-pound torpedo, could alternatively carry 2,000 pounds of various ordnance, bombs, rockets, or mixed munitions. Avengers furnished close air support during amphibious campaigns throughout the Pacific Theater, striking Japanese fortifications, artillery batteries, and troop concentrations with bombs and rockets. These assignments lacked the dramatic appeal of carrier battles, but remained absolutely vital. The aircraft's adaptability extended well beyond combat duties. The generous internal space permitted carrying cargo, mail, and passengers. Avengers functioned as flying ambulances, retrieving injured personnel from remote island airfields. They executed photo reconnaissance missions, gathering intelligence on enemy dispositions. They dropped mines into Japanese-controlled harbors and coastal waters. They participated in search and rescue operations, locating downed aviators. The intricate design that seemed problematic in 1941 had transformed by 1945 into the aircraft's most valuable characteristic. The Avenger could accomplish virtually any mission assigned. One Avenger pilot who learned firsthand about the aircraft's resilience was Ensign George Herbert Walker Bush. Born June 12, 1924, Bush signed into the Navy on his 18th birthday, enlisting the very day he graduated from Phillips Academy. He became the Navy's youngest designated aviator when he earned his wings on June 9, 1943, at 18 years of age. Bush received assignment to Torpedo Squadron 51 aboard the carrier San Jacinto. He accumulated 58 combat flights in Avengers, totaling 1,228 flight hours and executing 128 carrier landings. He saw action during operations against Wake Island, the Marianas, the Bonin Islands, and the Philippines. On September 2, 1944, 19-year-old Bush piloted his TBM Avenger, which bore the name Barbara after his fiancée. Launched from the carrier San Jacinto on a bombing mission against Japanese installations at Chichijima, his crew included Lieutenant Junior Grade William Lee White, serving as Ordnance Officer, and Radio Man Second Class John Delaney. The objective was a radio transmitter facility ringed with anti-aircraft guns. Anti-aircraft fire struck Bush's aircraft directly above the target. Flames erupted inside the engine compartment and acrid smoke flooded the cockpit. Ignoring the danger, Bush maintained his bombing run and successfully struck the radio installation. As fire consumed the fuselage, Bush commanded his crew to abandon the aircraft. He pointed the burning Avenger seaward, away from the island, maximizing his crew's chances of rescue away from Japanese captors. Bush ejected at approximately 2,000 feet altitude. His parachute deployed properly, but during his descent, his skull struck the tail assembly as he departed the aircraft. He splashed into the ocean with blood streaming from his forehead. Upon surfacing, he could locate no evidence of his two crew members. Neither White nor Delaney survived. Their parachutes had failed to open. Bush inflated his emergency raft and paddled with urgency away from Chichijima. Japanese soldiers began launching boats from the island in search. He paddled throughout the afternoon, his strength fading from the head injury and exhaustion. American aircraft circled protectively overhead, maintaining watch until assistance arrived. Following 4 hours adrift in the Pacific, the submarine USS Finback broke the surface nearby. The crew hauled the exhausted pilot aboard. Bush remained the sole survivor from his Avenger. For his courage in completing his bombing run despite his aircraft burning around him, Bush received the Distinguished Flying Cross. He completed his tour of combat operations and eventually returned stateside as a flight instructor. Following the war's conclusion, Bush embarked on a political career, serving as congressman and United Nations ambassador, later directing the Central Intelligence Agency, then serving as vice president and ultimately becoming the nation's 41st president. In 2009, the Navy commissioned the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS George H.W. Bush, designated CVN-77, bearing his name in recognition of his service. Bush had flown 58 combat missions in Avengers, logging 1,228 flight hours and making 128 carrier landings. He discovered what thousands of other Avenger pilots also learned through experience. The aircraft demanded skill and precision, offering no margin for carelessness. Yet when battle damage occurred, when enemy projectiles struck, when mechanical systems failed, the sophisticated engineering kept crews alive. The redundant systems, the excessive structural strength, the numerous backup components, working in concert, they brought men home. The numbers demonstrate what critics had refused to acknowledge. Nearly 10,000 Avengers rolled off assembly lines. Pilots flew over 46,000 combat sorties. Total combat losses numbered 729 aircraft. The loss rate of 1.58% per sortie ranked among the lowest of any combat aircraft throughout the war. Anti-aircraft fire accounted for 422 losses. Aerial combat resulted in merely 47 losses. Operational accidents, predominantly carrier landing mishaps, accounted for 260. The complicated systems supposedly destined for failure performed reliably time after time. The aircraft, condemned as excessively heavy for aerial combat, proved nearly impossible to kill. When compared alongside other torpedo bombers, the Avenger's superiority becomes unmistakable. The Japanese Nakajima B-5N Kate, which had wreaked devastation at Pearl Harbor, had become obsolete by 1943, lacking the speed, range, and defensive firepower necessary for survival against American fighters. The British Swordfish, wrapped in fabric and canvas, achieved legendary status precisely because it operated where modern fighters simply didn't exist. The American Douglas TBD Devastator, by contrast, encountered a different fate at Midway. When Torpedo Squadron 8 launched their attack, all 15 devastators from Hornet vanished. 29 young men never returned. The Avenger arrived on that same terrible day, flying the same mission, but one battered TBF limped back with 2 survivors still breathing. That single aircraft, scarred and battered, revealed a fundamental truth about design philosophy that would reshape naval aviation forever. The Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver, the Navy's dive bomber, became notorious for mechanical failures throughout the entire war. Pilots had a name for it, and their tone made clear it held no affection. The Helldiver's intricate design bred unreliability, while the Avenger's complexity bred something different entirely. Curtiss had aimed for a sophisticated aircraft that would barely function adequately. Grumman, meanwhile, had created an elaborate design that far exceeded what anyone required, then strengthened it even further. This philosophical divide proved everything. Post-war investigation uncovered the deeper reality. The Avenger thrived not in spite of its complexity, but because of it. Every intricate component served multiple functions. The cavernous bomb bay that added substantial weight and mechanical complication could carry torpedoes, bombs, depth charges, mines, radar sets, acoustic homing torpedoes, photographic equipment, extra fuel tanks, and cargo. No rival aircraft possessed this flexibility. The electrical gun turret that skeptics predicted would malfunction actually outperformed hydraulic alternatives, tracking enemy fighters faster. The stow folding wing mechanism, which introduced additional weight and mechanical parts, permitted this massive aircraft to squeeze onto small escort carriers, multiplying how many ships could operate them. Leroy Grumman conceived this remarkable wing design during a casual meeting, working with whatever materials lay nearby. A pink eraser served as the fuselage. Paper clips became experimental wings. By testing different angles, he unlocked a compound pivot arrangement that allowed the wings to fold upward and backward simultaneously. This mechanism, the stow wing, compressed the 54-foot 2-inch span down to roughly 18 feet when fully folded. This breakthrough enabled the enormous Avenger to fit aboard the tiniest escort carriers. The stow wing became Grumman's signature innovation, appearing on the Hellcat, Bearcat, Cougar, and eventually the E-2 Hawkeye. That sturdy construction, which added considerable weight, saved countless lives. Avengers returned to their carriers with wings perforated by bullets, engines belching smoke, hydraulic systems destroyed, electrical systems fried, yet still responding to control inputs. The reinforced structure and backup systems, even the extra weight, all combined to deliver crews safely home. Pilots described flying back with damage that should have been catastrophic, yet the aircraft held together. By war's conclusion, the Avenger had completed more combat missions than any Navy torpedo bomber before it. It had destroyed more enemy vessels than any other American aircraft. It had eliminated more submarines than any aircraft in recorded history. It had operated in more roles, more geographic regions, and more challenging conditions than any contemporary bomber. The aircraft, dismissed as overly complicated, had proven itself perfectly engineered for everything war demanded. The Avenger's service extended well beyond 1945. Post-war versions continued flying with American forces until 1954, when newer designs finally took over frontline duties. Canada's Navy operated their Avengers until 1960, employing them against submarines in the chilling North Atlantic waters. The Canadian AS-3 variant featured a magnetic anomaly detection boom trailing from the tail section, advanced electronics for tracking Soviet submarines beneath the surface, and sufficient endurance for extended North Atlantic patrols. France flew Avengers from their carrier during early Indochina operations in the 1950s. Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force used them for submarine patrol into the early 1960s. The Netherlands operated them from their carrier. Brazil, Uruguay, and numerous other nations discovered that the Avenger's combination of payload, range, and dependability made it superior to supposedly newer alternatives. The complicated aircraft that seemed difficult to maintain actually proved remarkably simple to keep operational. Multiple nations preferred it to supposedly superior modern designs. The TBM 3W variant pioneered radar warning functions, carrying the massive ANAPS-20 radar inside its distinctive radome. This flying radar station detected enemy aircraft far beyond what ship-based systems could achieve, giving fleet commanders critical advance warning. The TBM-3S, dedicated to submarine hunting, carried advanced sonobuoys, radar, and acoustic homing weapons. These versions performed so effectively that Avengers remained in Navy service for 9 years after the war concluded, an extraordinary lifespan for a World War II design. The Avengers' final combat appearance came in 1951 during Korea, though legend claims otherwise regarding torpedo attacks. That honor belonged to the Douglas AD Skyraider, the Avengers' successor. On May 1, 1951, 8 AD-4 Skyraiders from Attack Squadron 195 and Composite Squadron 35 launched from Princeton to strike the Hwacheon Dam in North Korea. Enemy forces controlled the water flow strategically, flooding areas when UN troops advanced, then halting the water to trap them in exposed riverbeds. The Skyraiders carried Mark 13 torpedoes, the identical weapons Avengers had used throughout the war. 8 torpedoes dropped, 7 struck the dam, 6 detonated, blasting concrete and crippling it for the remainder of the conflict. This mission remains the final instance in history when aerial torpedoes were used against a surface target. The torpedo bomber era concluded where it had flourished, with aircraft launching weapons against strategic objectives. The Avenger had defined that entire era, establishing standards its own successor ultimately could not surpass. Contemporary analysis reveals Avenger design decisions remarkably advanced for their period. The modular weapons bay accepting different payloads without alteration anticipated modern multi-role fighters. Extensive electrical systems over hydraulics foreshadowed jet-age design. Prioritizing crew survival over raw performance influenced military aviation philosophy for 7 decades ahead. Integrating radar, communications, and electronic systems into one airframe established templates for modern naval aviation. William Schweinfurt, Leroy Grumman, Robert Hall, and the engineering team at Grumman had constructed far more than an elaborate torpedo bomber. They had created naval aviation's future, contained within a barrel-shaped fuselage that critics called ugly. They demonstrated that survivability could be engineered through redundancy and sturdy construction. They proved versatility mattered more than specialization. They established that crew capability translated into mission success more than performance statistics. This design philosophy shaped American naval aviation for generations, emphasizing bringing crews safely home, championing multi-role capability, and establishing patterns for integrating advanced electronics and weapons that continue today. The Avenger was not simply a successful World War II aircraft. It was a blueprint for constructing combat aircraft that adapted, survived, and accomplished diverse missions. The statistics reveal everything. 12 aircraft carriers sunk or damaged beyond repair. 6 battleships, including the 2 largest vessels ever constructed. 19 cruisers, 25 destroyers, approximately 30 submarines, over 500 merchant vessels. 1 million tons of enemy shipping dispatched to the ocean floor. 729 aircraft lost from nearly 10,000 built. 46,000 combat sorties, a loss rate of 1.58%. The highest kill ratio among any American aircraft during World War II, measuring enemy vessels sunk against aircraft losses. The designers never attempted to build the most beautiful aircraft. They never pursued simplicity. They built the most effective aircraft, and effectiveness demanded sophistication. Every component, every redundancy, every backup system, every additional pound of weight served the mission. Critics observing only complexity missed purpose behind every decision. This aircraft was not elaborate for elaboration's sake. It was sophisticated because war demands unpredictability, and survival requires preparation for every conceivable contingency. The production accomplishment itself warrants recognition. 9,836 aircraft rolled off assembly lines in merely 3 years. At peak output, factories delivered over 200 monthly. General Motors, having never constructed a single aircraft before the war, became the primary manufacturer through innovative techniques. Automobile factories transformed into aircraft plants in months, demonstrating American industrial capacity at its zenith. Assembly workers who had built Chevrolets now produced torpedo bombers, rotating through 3 shifts to meet Navy requirements. The Avenger's operational flexibility impressed equally. Beyond famous torpedo attacks, Avengers dropped conventional bombs more frequently than torpedoes. They pioneered nighttime operations, using radar to locate and strike targets in absolute darkness. They conducted combat search and rescue, recovering hundreds of downed aviators across the Pacific. They functioned as flying ambulances, evacuating critically injured personnel from island battles. They transported supplies to isolated positions. They photographed enemy facilities for intelligence purposes. They monitored shipping lanes for submarines. They delivered close support for marine forces. No other aircraft type successfully performed such diverse roles. Human losses remained significant despite lower casualty rates compared to other torpedo bombers. Approximately 730 crews perished in combat, representing over 2,000 American lives. Countless others suffered wounds. The aircraft could deliver crews through tremendous damage, yet could not render them invulnerable. The lower loss rate meant more crews survived their tours. More pilots returned to train successors. More experience persisted and advanced. Engineering decisions prioritizing survivability translated directly into preserved lives. Individual heroism by Avenger crews fills military history volumes. Beyond famous names, thousands of pilots, bombardiers, radio men, and gunners flew through anti-aircraft fire and fighter attacks to deliver weapons on target. They flew typhoons, darkness, extreme range, impossible conditions. They pressed attacks against devastating defenses. They remained with damaged aircraft to bring wounded crew members home rather than bailing out. The Avenger provided them a fighting chance. Their courage did the remainder. The torpedo bomber era has ended. Modern anti-ship missiles accomplish in minutes what required entire waves of torpedo bombers in 1944. No nation operates torpedo bombers. The mission itself has become obsolete, yet Avenger lessons remain relevant across every engineering and design domain. Over-engineering for survivability preserves lives. Redundancy determines victories. Sophisticated and well-executed complexity creates capability. Versatility frequently surpasses specialization. The capacity to absorb punishment and persist determines survival. These principles extend far beyond aviation. The Avenger demonstrated that robust construction costs less than replacement. Armor, redundant systems, and overbuilt structure were repaid repeatedly by aircraft surviving for additional missions. Crews living to fight again reduced training requirements because experienced pilots survived. Accountants might have preferred lighter, cheaper aircraft. Combat records proved them incorrect. Investment in survivability yielded returns measured in victories and preserved lives. The ugliest duckling became the deadliest hunter. Sometimes the aircraft everyone called overly elaborate is precisely sophisticated enough to accomplish what nothing else can achieve. The Avenger proved this truth in the most demanding crucible imaginable: combat against determined enemies who had prepared for war while America remained unready. Aircraft critics dismissed it, yet it accomplished what more elegant designs could not. It transformed naval warfare rules. It set new survivability standards. It demonstrated capabilities influencing military aviation for generations ahead. Today, surviving Avengers fly at air shows, reminding new generations of American industrial achievement and American airman capability. Approximately 60 Avengers remain worldwide in various conditions. Several maintain airworthiness through dedicated organizations. When a restored Avenger passes overhead, its unmistakable shape and distinctive engine sound transport observers backward to when these unlikely warriors dominated Pacific skies. The Avenger departing Bethpage in August 1941, the ungainly beast critics dismissed, proved them entirely wrong. It accomplished this through relentless effectiveness, mission after mission, year after year, in every demanded role. The sophisticated torpedo bomber that should have failed instead rewrote naval aviation rules and sank more enemy ships than any aircraft in history. In the end, it was not elaborate enough to fail. It was sophisticated enough to win, and winning meant bringing home more crews alive than any other torpedo bomber ever built. That achievement, beyond tonnage sunk or battle honors earned, represents the true measure of Avenger success. The aircraft kept its promise. It brought them home.